Welcome to Aaron Mahnke's Cabinet of Curiosities, a production of iHeartRadio and Grim and Mild.
Our world is full of the unexplainable. And if history is an open book, all of these amazing tales are right there on display, just waiting for us to explore. Welcome to the Cabinet of Curiosities. It was Christmas time 1927, and the largest manhunt Texas had ever seen was underway. A posse of 100 men was scouring the Lone Star State. Their target had many aliases: Kris Kringle, Old St. Nick, even Papa Noel. But no matter what name he went by, the truth was the same. Santa Claus had robbed a bank. Just a few weeks earlier, Marshall Ratliff took his first breath of free air after 2 long years. He had been in prison for bank robbery in a tiny central Texas town called Valera, but he walked free after the governor granted him a pardon. Immediately, he began to plot his next heist. It was a particularly dangerous time for bank robbers in Texas. Multiple banks were being robbed every day, and the Texas Bankers Association put up a bounty of $5,000 for anyone who killed a would-be thief. Today, that would be the equivalent of about $85,000, so lawmen and vigilantes alike were eager to get their payout. Marshall knew to get away clean, he needed the right team and the right approach. And so he staked out the First National Bank of Cisco, Texas, to make a plan. He recruited 2 other ex-cons, Henry Helms and Robert Hill, and when their original safecracker fell ill, they added Louis Davis, Henry's relative, to the team. And since Marshall himself was known to people in Cisco, he decided the best way to pull off the heist would be in disguise. Luckily for him, the woman running the boarding house he lived in had just the thing: a homemade Santa Claus suit, complete with a beard. The plan was simple: drop Marshall in full Santa getup in town close to the bank, when they would park their getaway car in the alley out back. Henry, Robert, and Louis would then follow Marshall into the bank. They would steal the cash and exit through a side door to drive off into the sunset. It was nearly foolproof. On December 23rd of 1927, the townspeople of Cisco didn't find anything suspicious about a man in a Santa suit strolling into the bank. In fact, on his journey into First National, Marshall was stopped by several children giving him their Christmas wish lists. Inside the bank, however, was a totally different story. The second that Marshall and his 3 accomplices entered the building, they pulled out their pistols and told the workers and patrons inside to put their hands up. Marshall pulled out a bag and told the tellers to begin filling it. In the chaos, however, the gang lost sight of one bank customer and her young daughter. The 2 slipped into a back office and out a side door, and then immediately ran into the police station just a block away. Minutes later, the bank was surrounded. The in-and-out heist the gang had planned was no longer possible, so they began to improvise. Marshall's gang entered the alley, pushing 8 hostages ahead of them as human shields. They thought that the police wouldn't shoot if there were civilians in the way. However, they thought wrong. A firefight quickly broke out, wounding police, robbers, and hostages alike. But amidst the melee, the 4 thieves were able to get into their getaway car, and go, along with 2 4th-grade girls, as hostages. It quickly became obvious, though, that they had a problem. Whether a bullet had made a leak in the gas tank or the robbers simply forgot to fill up, the issue was clear. They were almost out of gas. There was no way that they were getting out of Cisco. At the edge of the town, they tried to steal a passing car, ordering the driver out at gunpoint. But by the time they loaded the cash, the hostages, and themselves into the new car, they realized the driver had run off with the keys in his hand. Facing more gunfire, they jumped into their original getaway car and drove off. But in the confusion, they left behind Louis, who had fallen unconscious from his wounds, as well as the bag of cash. It seems that after all this trouble to rob a bank, they would have nothing to show for it. The 3 remaining robbers made it about 2 miles out of town before they abandoned their car with the hostages inside. The ensuing manhunt lasted another 7 days, with nearly 100 men on their trail, desperate for their cut of the bounty. Marshall was caught on December 26th, and Henry and Robert were captured on December 30th. Altogether, 12 people were wounded and 3 people, including Louis Davis, were killed. The money, worth $172,000 at the time, would have been the largest bank heist in Texas history. At least it would have been, had the robbers not left it behind in the chaos. Santa suit or not, those bank robbers would spend the rest of their lives on the naughty list. You learn a lot about a city based on the food they have available to visitors. There's nothing quite like flying into New York late at night and hunting down some cheap street food to keep yourself going. It may never be the healthiest option, but it's always a relief to weary travelers. The wide availability of simple, prepared foods is an essential part of a big city today. But how far back into history does that go? It's perhaps not surprising to remember that people have not always been quite so traveled and food not quite so industrialized. And the farther back in time you go, the more interesting these differences become. Cities were smaller, preserving food for long periods was always a challenge, and in medieval times, it was not always a given that a house would have a kitchen of its own. Which brings us to one of the epicenters of the medieval world, Jerusalem. The central city of the Holy Land is easily the most contested location of the era. During the Crusades, it changed hands multiple times, first when Christian crusaders conquered the city in 1099, then when Saladin took it back, and back and forth for much of the High Middle Ages. Now, despite weathering regular violence, sieges, and religious conflict, the city still had to function like a city, as the capital of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Ordinary people still came and went, people with no intention to participate in a crusade. It was a hub of travel for individuals of many different faiths. And for that reason, the rulers of the city had many warring interests to contend with, which is why in the 1140s, the city was in the midst of a quiet political struggle between Fulk of Anjou and his wife, the heir to the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Melisande. The late king's will determined that she should rule, but Fulk did not agree. He made many attempts to undermine his wife's authority, resulting in a tenuous arrangement where they would be co-rulers of the city as king and queen. But all of this came to an end in 1143. Fulk and Melisande were riding in the countryside when the king of Jerusalem spotted a hare. Seized by a hunter's instinct, he charged after it. His horse stumbled and fell, whereupon Fulk received a grievous head injury. He would die of it some days later. And with this, Melisande took the throne for herself, ruling the kingdom of Jerusalem alongside her young son Baldwin III. She would be the first woman to hold public office in this kingdom, although her reign would eventually end due to infighting with her increasingly headstrong son. But this is where we get back to food. You see, Melisande did not spend all of her reign grappling for power with her immediate family members. She also seemingly had an interest in improving Jerusalem for its citizens. At her direction, 3 parallel streets would be established to become a sort of open market for the city, where travelers and citizens alike could go in order to purchase goods. And this so-called triple market consisted of 3 streets: the Street of Herbs, the Covered Street, and the Street of Bad Cooking. And this 3rd street would perhaps become the most infamous of them all. It's there that locals would prepare vast quantities of low-quality food to be sold cheaply. The meat was bad, almost always rancid, but caked in enough spices that you'd hardly be able to tell. And if you're a crusader or a pilgrim who had just traveled thousands of leagues in order to come here, you likely wouldn't be complaining. But don't worry, not all of the food was of poor quality. There were fresh fruits available not far from the Street of Bad Cooking, as well as great local bread. It seems that Melisande's triple market was something of a city in miniature. In it, you could see people from all over the world brought into a very small location, all seeking a bite to eat. And thus, thanks to her, the violence, turmoil, and upheaval of the Crusades gave way to a business practice that wouldn't have a name until the modern times: fast food. I hope you've enjoyed today's guided tour of the Cabinet of Curiosities. Subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts or learn more about the show by visiting curiositiespodcast.com. This show was created by me, Aaron Mahnke, in partnership with How Stuff Works. I make another award-winning show called Lore, which is a podcast, book series, and television show, and you can learn all about it over at theworldoflore.com. And until next time, stay curious.